don't have to, I'm going to be repeating this. Okay, so well, I'm going to repeat it already in the last one, but everything's done. She's in the king's court having to follow him around where he's going to party all the time, and she doesn't want to have anything to do with it. She's polite. She doesn't have to have court etiquette because of her position, but she goes and is like a hermit. It was her only game, her only relief, and she played. She would uh, set up war scenario games in her head. She played video games. She built super cities. It was her only game, her only relief from her burden of sorrow and inaction. She played at it hour after hour, so others played chess and lost herself in it. She never complained, of course, it was not her way. She was the sort that endured in silence, but she was a caged eagle just the same, and pined for the free air and the alpine heights and the fierce joys of the storm. France was full of rovers, disbanded soldiers ready for anything that might turn up. Several times at intervals, when Joan's dull captivity grew too heavy to bear, she was allowed to gather a troop of cavalry and make a health restoring dash against the enemy. These things were like a bath to her spirits. It was like old times there at Saint Pierre la Moutière to see her lead assault after assault, be driven back again and again, but always rally and charge anew, all in a blaze of eagerness and delight, till at last the tempest of missiles rained so intolerably thick that old Dolan, who was wounded, sounded the retreat, for the king had charged him on his head to let no harm come to Joan. And away everybody rushed after him, as he supposed. But when he turned and looked, there were we of the staff still hammering away. Wherefore he rode back and urged her to come, saying she was mad to stay there with only a dozen men. Her eye danced merrily, and she turned upon him, crying out, "A dozen men, name of God! I have 50,000 and will never budge till this place is taken. Sound the charge!" Which he did, and over the walls we went, and the fortress was ours. Old Dolan thought her mind was wandering, but all she meant was that she felt the might of 50,000 men surging in her heart. It was a fanciful expression, but to my thinking, truer word was never said. Then there was the affair near Lagny, where we charged the entrenched Burgundians through the open field 4 times, the last time victoriously. The best prize of it, Conquête d'Arras, the freebooter and pitiless scourge of the region round about. Now and then other such affairs, and at last away toward the end of May, 1430, we were in the neighborhood of Compiègne, and Joan resolved to go to the help of that place, which was being besieged by the Duke of Burgundy. I had been wounded lately and was not able to ride without help, but the good dwarf took me on behind him, and I held on to him and was safe enough. We started at midnight in a sullen downpour of warm rain, and went slowly and softly and in dead silence, for we had to slip through the enemy's lines. We were challenged only once. We made no answer, but held our breath and crept steadily and stealthily along, and got through without any accident. About 3 or 1/2 past, we reached Compiègne just as the gray dawn was breaking at the east. Joan set to work at once and concentrated a plan with Guillaume de Clary, captain of the city, a plan for a sortie toward evening against the enemy, who was posted in 3 bodies on the other side of the Oise in the level plain. From our side, one of the city gates communicated with a bridge. The end of the bridge was defended on the other side of the river by one of these fortresses called a boulevard, and this boulevard also commanded a raised road, which stretched from its front across the plain to the village of Margilles. A force of Burgundians occupied Margilles, and a body of English was holding Venette, a mile and a half below it. A kind of bow and arrow arrangement, you see. The causeway the arrow, the boulevard the feather end of it. Margilles at the bar, Venette at one end of the bow. Wow. Claire, wow. At the other. Joan's plan was to go straight for Causeway against Margis, carry it by assault, then turn swiftly upon Claire's up to the right and capture that gangway, then face to the rear and be ready for heavy work. For the Duke of Burgundy lay behind Claire's with the reserve. Flavius' lieutenant and archers in the artillery of the boulevard was to keep the English troops from coming up from below and seizing the causeway and cutting off Joan's retreat in case she should have to make one. Also, a fleet of covered boats was to be stationed near the boulevard as an additional help in case a retreat should become necessary. Well, we were at Boulevard and we talked about all the boats. That was kind of interesting. It was the 24th of May at 4 in the afternoon. Joan moved out at the head of 600 cavalry on her last march in this life. It breaks my heart. I had got myself helped up to the wall, and from there I saw much that happened. The rest was told me long afterwards by our two knights and other eyewitnesses. Joan crossed the bridge and soon left the boulevard behind her and went skimming away over the raised road with her horsemen clattering at her heels. She had on a brilliant silver gilt cape over her armor, and I could see it flap and flare and rise and fall like a little patch of white flame. It was a bright day, and no one could see far and wide over that plain. Soon we saw the English force advancing swiftly and in handsome order, the sunlight flashing from its arms. Joan crashed into the Burgundians at Margis and was repulsed. Then we saw the other Burgundians moving down from Claire's. Joan called her men and charged again and was again whirled back. Two assaults occupy a good deal of time, and time is precious here. The English were approaching the road now from Vinette, but the boulevard opened fire on them and they were checked. Joan heartened her men with inspiring words and led them to the charge again in great style. This time that she carried Margis with a hurrah. Then she turned at once to the right and plunged into the plain and struck the Claire's force, which was just arriving. Then there was heavy work and plenty of it. The two armies hurling each other backward, turn about and about, and victory inclining first to the one, then to the other. Now all of a sudden there was a panic on our side. Some say one thing caused it, some another. Some say the cannonade made our front ranks think retreat was being cut off by the English. Some say the rear ranks got the idea that Joan was killed. Anyway, broke and went flying in a wild rout for the causeway. Joan tried to rally them and face them around, crying to them that the victory was sure, but it did no good. They passed by her like a wave. Old Dolan begged her to retreat while there was yet a chance for safety, but she refused. So he seized her horse's bridle and bore her along with the wreck and ruin in spite of herself. And so along the causeway they came swarming, that wild confusion of frenzied men and horses, and the artillery had to stop firing, of course. Consequently, the English and Burgundians closed in safety, the former in front, the latter behind their prey. Clear to the boulevard, the French were washed in this enveloping inundation, and there, cornered in an angle formed by the flank of the boulevard and the slope of the causeway, they bravely fought a hopeless fight and sank down one by one. Flavie, watched from the city wall, ordered the gate to be closed and the drawbridge raised. This shut Joan out. The little personal guard around her thinned swiftly. Both of our good knights went down, disabled. Joan's two brothers fell wounded. The Noel Rangousin, all wounded while loyally sheltering Joan from blows aimed at her. When only the dwarf and the paladin were left, they would not give up, but stood their ground stoutly, a pair of steel towers streaked and splashed with blood, and where the axe of the one fell, the sword of the other, as the enemy gasped and died. And so fighting and loyal to their duty to the last, good simple souls, they came to their honorable end. Peace in their memorial, they were dear to me. Then there was a cheer and a rush, and Joan, still defiant, still laying about her with her sword, was seized by her cape and dragged from her horse. She was borne away a prisoner to the Duke of Burgundy's camp. and after had followed the victorious army, roaring its joy. The awful news started instantly on its round. From lip to lip it flew, and wherever it came, it struck the people as with a sort of paralysis, and they murmured over and over again, as if they were talking to themselves or in their sleep. The Maid of Orleans taken, Joan of Arc a prisoner, the Savior of France lost to us, and would keep saying that over as if they couldn't understand how it could be or how could permit it. Poor creatures. You know what a city is like when it is hung from eaves to pavement with rustling black? Then you know what Tours was like, and some other cities. But can any man tell you what the mourning in their hearts of the peasantry of France was like? No, nobody can tell you that. And poor dumb things, they could not have told you themselves, but it was there, indeed, yes. Why, it was the spirit of a whole nation hung with crape. The 24th of May, we will draw down the curtain now upon the most strange and pathetic and wonderful military drama that has been played upon the stage of the world. Joan of Arc will march no more. So, May 24th, she was taken by the English and the Burgundies. So, they, uh, trial and martyrdom.